Um, Good day, everybody. World Lion Day is just around the corner. My name is Dr. Paul Funston. I work for Panthera, the global leaders in large cat conservation. I'm the senior director of our lion program in Africa, and I have a deep and abiding passion and interest in lions. Where I am right now is in Victoria Falls, on the border here between Zambia and Zimbabwe. I'm talking to you from Ilala Lodge, where we were very graciously given this wonderful venue to do this transmission from. That's hashtag Ilala Lodge for those of you that are interested. And it's just an amazing place to be. It's right in the heart of the Khaza landscape, the largest conservation landscape in the world. It's the area where the famous lion Cecil and his sibling, his youngsters, his male cub, who was no longer a cub, who was Xander, was killed recently. And it's a very, very important area for lion conservation and lion connectivity in the Khaza landscape. World Lion Day will be on Thursday this week, on the 10th, and we will try and bring you a live feed or a video feed of myself and the president of Panthera, Dr. Luke Hunter, from the field in Wangi, hopefully with some lions in view. But in order to facilitate this live view, we had to be here at a lodge in Victoria Falls. My career, well, I've been working on lions now for 25 years. I've been incredibly lucky to have this opportunity to understand and to work on lions for so long. People often ask me, well, why lions? And why did you get into lions? And it started way back when I was more interested in ecology. I trained as an ecologist at university. And I was really interested in the role of large mammals in management and how managers would use information that researchers could gather to facilitate their management. And so after various research projects, the opportunity came up to study lions in the Kruger Park during a very severe drought time when there was a massive die-off of buffalo. So this was a really interesting ecological question that the managers wanted to have studied. And that's what I did my PhD on. But fortunately, my supervisor at university wanted me to also delve into the behavioral ecology of lions and to understand their scent marking and their territorial behavior. And it was that work which really sort of got me thinking about how lions think, what drives the decisions they make, etc. So I've always tried to combine my deep interest in ecology and how ecosystems function and how animals think and how they decide how to move and how to live and how to partition themselves in the landscape in terms of perhaps being territorial or not. And so lions have been with me for 25 years now. Firstly for my PhD, and then I worked on lions in the Kalahari, and I learned right back then about the conservation issues. There, lions were being killed around the borders of the park quite a lot, and we had to work out whether this was impacting the population. And then eventually, after a stint in academia, I joined Panthera to lead and to run our lion program. And we welcome questions today. People, please just send in and ask me anything that you'd like to know about lions. I have a question here where Hayden is asking populations, how they've been doing in the last couple of years. So we've just done a lot of assessments on this recently, and we've tried to put together the best available information for the IUCN Red List assessment. And what we found is that, alarmingly, we think that there are probably only about 20,000 wild lions left in Africa today. People often ask, well, what does that mean? Where were lions 10 years ago? Where were they 20 years ago? We can't always answer that question because we don't always have the information at hand. But it is fair to guesstimate that at least 100 years ago, there were probably several 100,000 lions in Africa. And the indications are that in the last 2 decades, the slide has been quite severe. So it's probably fair to say that in the last 2 decades, lions have declined from 30,000 plus to around about 20,000 today. And this is most severe in certain parts of Africa. Central and East Africa, Central and West Africa have experienced the most severe declines, with lions having declined by 85 to 90% across their range in that part of Africa. People often think of East Africa, the Serengeti Plains, the Selous National Park, etc., as the real place for lions. But even there, lions have been declining, and our estimates are that around about a 40 to 50% decline in lions over the last 2 decades. And in southern Africa, fortunately, lions are doing a bit better. And the lions in southern Africa are either neutral or slightly increasing, depending on which southern African country you look at. And this is all basically correlated directly with government investment in the protection of these animals. If there's no money to spend on protecting the protected areas in which lions occur, they decline very dramatically. And we can talk about the various threats that lions face as the conversation progresses. Jackie is asking, and I'm battling to read this because it's slightly obscured on my screen. I need to try and fix this problem I'm having. What country has the best outlook for wild lion populations, and which has the most detrimental? So certainly the countries in southern Africa, Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and to a lesser degree perhaps Zambia, in those countries lions are perhaps doing better than in most. And it's surprising, and even countries which are relatively poor like Mozambique, with concerted effort in some areas, lions are doing quite well. Countries with political difficulty and instability and financial challenges like Zimbabwe, in certain of their protected areas, and certainly some of their private states, lions are doing very well. And then in countries like South Africa and Botswana and Namibia, the government have got quite substantive resources to invest in lion conservation, and they're doing very well in those sorts of countries. So it is really directly correlated to government investment and government will. Those are the ultimate, things that will determine whether lions do well or not. The NGOs, the philanthropic sector, the multilateral agencies, etc., the donor community are going to be needed, and we certainly need that investment, in many cases as a stopgap, but also for long-term solutions. But ultimately, we want the governments to invest in protecting the resources that they are in charge of. So talking about threats to lions, people often ask, well, why are lions declining? What is affecting them? And I think what we find today is that lions are generally restricted, mostly, by and large, to protected areas. By protected areas, I mean the sort of national parks or game reserves of Africa, these areas which have been set aside as sacrosanct wildlife preserves. Most lions to nowadays are restricted to these sorts of areas. Only about 20 to 30% of lions occur outside of protected areas in other forms of land use, like communal lands, conservancies, etc., places where they interact a bit more closely with people. So certainly at that interface, either at the interface, the edge of protected areas, or in landscapes where people live with lions, the conflicts that lions and people get into over livestock and the depredation of lions on people's livestock is a major threat to lion populations, and it's why lions are largely obliterated from those sorts of landscapes. I see some other questions coming up here about corridors from Rhonda, who says, do you think wildlife corridors linking parks and reserves would help the lion populations in Africa? So that helps me sort of expand on this idea of conflict and what's also threatening lions inside protected areas. So inside protected areas, the biggest threat to lions nowadays is bushmeat poaching. So in many, many protected areas in Africa, there's just not enough resources to effectively combat bushmeat poaching, and lions are very vulnerable to it because they walk through game trails, etc., and so they walk into snares quite readily. So our first and most important priority with lions is to ensure that the protected areas in which lions live are safe, and that the challenges that they face both within the protected areas, but very importantly on the edges of protected areas, are addressed. And I'd like to talk more about that just now, and even use some case studies from here in Wangi National Park nearby. Corridors will be important for maintaining genetic diversity, and lions are known to move very long distances, particularly subadult males. Understanding how subadult males move and connect populations is critical for looking at the genetic flow and the connectivity of populations. So talking a bit more about these threats, and clearly we've mentioned bushmeat poaching, we've mentioned human-wildlife conflict, habitat loss, degradation of habitat, conversion of habitat to agriculture. I think we have to see those sorts of things as that is the status quo. You know, certain land uses have changed forever. You know, if an area is an agricultural field, that's probably what it's going to stay. But there's a lot of opportunity to find ways in which lions can live, or at least commute through landscapes in which people live. And the most important way to do that is to make sure that lions are safe when they're in these corridor or human landscapes, that the lions are safe from people. And the only way that we've really worked out to sort of effectively achieve that is to make sure that the animal husbandry practices, the way people manage their livestock, ensures that lions and cows don't come into the same place at the same time. And the best ways that we find that we achieve that is to make sure that at night, when lions are generally more active and foraging and hunting, that cattle are safely corralled or put in a boma or a corral or stockade, some sort of structure which is lion-proof. And in the day, that cattle are either grazed in areas away from lions, so you might have a way to know where the lions are in an area, perhaps through radio telemetry, or local trackers might track the lions and be able to inform the community where the lions are. Also, another way to achieve it is to have herders move with the herds and with human presence with the lions. If you've got 2 or 3 people or a group of people with a large group of cattle, you can generally chase lions away when they come nearby. So making sure that the cattle are safe from lion predation ensures ultimately that the lions will be safe and able to commute and move through these landscapes. Getting back to the protected areas, I certainly believe that these are the core areas for lion conservation in Africa. It's very easy to take a map of Africa and define where the major lion populations are, where the big protected areas are in which lions occur. And it's quite easy to assess how well lions are doing in those areas. We can count them, we can estimate their population sizes, but we can also look at the expenditure. Just look at the budgets that the governments are expending on these protected areas, and we can assess and we can see clearly that where budgets are high, lions tend to do better. Harry asks, am I optimistic for lions overall? I am optimistic that we will be able to protect lions in the protected areas of Africa going forward. I do not think, perhaps in contrast to what other people perhaps have suggested at times, I do not see lions going extinct within 10 years, and I do not see lions going extinct within my lifetime. The future that I would like to see for lions is a recovery of lion populations. We know that the protected area network that exists in Africa today, if adequately protected, is large enough to support 3 to 4 times more lions than we have today. Will we achieve that? I don't know. But what I do know is Africa faces a lot of challenges. Human populations in Africa are growing, and they're growing at a very rapid rate. And so I suspect in the future that we will see even higher pressures on lion populations than what we see today. But what I also know is that Africa has very large protected areas, and it has set aside an incredibly large landmass for conservation. And if adequately supported and properly managed, these areas could support lions in perpetuity. And so certainly that is the future that I would like to see. I would like to see lions continue to exist, particularly in the protected area networks in Africa. I'd like to see greater investment in those protected areas. And where possible and where feasible, I'd like to see landscapes maintained where that's safe enough that lions can commute and move through them and maintain genetic integrity of the different populations' gene flow. This is something that we also can simulate. We know a lot about how to move and to capture lions and to reintroduce lions into new areas. So there's a lot of techniques that we can apply to facilitate that if it's not possible. So certainly maintaining the protected area network in Africa is absolutely key. Minimizing the challenges that lions face both within the protected areas but also on the edges of them is absolutely vital. So talking about some sort of the local areas and some of the work that we've been investing in here in Hwange National Park, there you have a situation where fortunately inside the protected area the poaching threat to lions is actually relatively low. So there's sufficient investment from the statutory authority, the government, in managing the park, that poaching is not severe within the park. And so populations of lions within the park are doing well. But the populations of lions on the edge of the park are challenged, because in the edge areas, they face the sort of full suite of threats that they often face. There is a lot of bushmeat poaching just outside the park in the sort of state forest areas around the park. There's a lot of conflict with humans over livestock. Many communities live right up against the sort of interface with a protected area. And then there's a degree of trophy hunting of lions there. And then lions are also killed in other ways by humans, sometimes by speeding cars, and surprisingly also by trains, moving through the area. So in that area, for example, lions face multiple threats simultaneously in the same space. And that has a marked effect on the local populations of lions in the edges of those protected areas. Raven is asking me, can you really be so sure that putting people with the herds would be helpful? All I ever hear about are retaliation killings by herders. So yes, we do hear a lot about retaliation killing, and we have to ask some quite deep questions. Why is it that people in the modern world resort rather to retaliatory killing than protecting their livestock? I'm pretty sure that in times gone by, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, perhaps if we might have to go back that far, that rural African people would not have resorted to retaliatory killing as much as they do today. That people in those days would have invested more energy in protecting their livestock and making sure that their livestock was safe, and that when they moved through the landscape, and if they were either pastoralists who were mobile and moving with their herds, or agro-pastoralists who were investing more in agriculture and fields and crops, were having some livestock as well. I think that in those times that people invested a lot more energy in herding. We know that herding really works. There are many reasons why people don't herd as much today. Many families want to send their children to school. They might lead a rural existence, but their children need to go to school and become educated so that they can have prospects to do well in life and to enter the sort of economic environment around. So there are not as many people available to herd anymore. So I do think we have to reinvigorate herding. I think we have to look at making it in some sort of way a professional kind of practice. It's not a higher paying salary, but it's a sort of job that communities could work together, perhaps with some support from donors, to foster herding. We do believe that herding is a very effective way of mitigating human-lion conflict and stopping lions killing people's cows. So yes, I think it can be done, but it requires some challenges and some recognition that the sort of socioeconomic climate of today is not what it was before. So we've spoken a little bit about the threats and the key threats. We've spoken about the fact that we think that lion populations could increase. Certainly at Panthera, that is our goal. So at Panthera, we invest in a suite of projects and a suite of sites across the African landscape. We can't be everywhere. We don't have the resources to be everywhere. But in the sites that we do work in, we try and, typically in our program, address three major threats to lions: bushmeat poaching, human-wildlife conflict, and trophy hunting. So when I'm looking at my budget and I'm planning for the year ahead, those are the three sorts of threats that I think are the ones that we can tackle and need to tackle the most aggressively in order to ensure lion persistence going forward. And we need to be very strategic about this. We need to think about where best to invest those resources. And so what we try and do in our lion program is either to work through partners, existing projects, existing teams of people on the ground who committed to a particular site, who've shown that they have a long-term interest in that site, or we pick sites ourselves that we will have a long-term interest, and then we go and try and ensure that the resourcing that's required to conserve and to protect lions in that landscape is facilitated. So I'm not seeing a lot of questions pop up, folks. You need to ask me some questions so that I can keep digging into informing you and helping you understand more some of the challenges that lions face. Trophy hunting is an issue that I've mentioned that lions are challenged with, and it's a very vexing issue. The way that we try and work on this issue is we try and engage with the governments directly to make sure that what they do well, and it's very, very vexing. So around some of the parks, some of the edges of the protected areas, sometimes iconic and well-known individual lions are hunted. And this is something we really need to think very carefully going forward about, because it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that you invest a huge time and energy and resources in addressing things like bushmeat poaching and human-wildlife conflict, and then another anthropogenic, another human-induced form of mortality is sort of allowed to go on unabated. So we really think that we need to think of ways to buffer and protect the edges of our protected areas a bit more from these various threats, including trophy hunting, that it might be time to start moving this form of use further away from the key protected areas. If it is to persist, and who knows whether it will persist on into the future or not, but certainly I think we need to think very carefully about whether this is a valid approach, a valid form of use on the edge of protected areas, in which other sectors are very much invested, where you have this, the eco-tourism, the tourism industry working very hard to work with and habituate lions so that lions understand and know people well, and then them getting killed. So this is something we need to think about, and we would really like to see this pressure alleviated and taken away, particularly from the edges of our protected areas and where the ecotourism operators are very invested. George is asking, is Panthera's work on lions purely in Africa, or are there local organizations in India working on Asiatic lions? Thank you for everything we do. Well, thank you, George, for that. No, we don't work in Asia on lions ourselves, but we have partners in Asia working on the other large cats in Asia, very, very much so. We have, of course, the tiger program, the snow leopard program, the leopard program. I mean, think of leopards as very much as an African species, and it's become clear to me now that it's known, but it wasn't necessarily that clear to me that leopards occur right across to China through Asia. So the big cats are well represented in Asia. Lions, of course, only really occur in a very small, isolated population in the Gir forest, where there's a remarkably high population for such a small area, with a remarkable tolerance from local communities. It's absolutely fascinating to look at how the religious cultures of Asia are more suited, perhaps at times, to dealing with the conflict and much more gentle in their approaches. T is asking me, is it becoming impossible to do conservation work on certain areas due to the presence of terrorist groups, e.g. Eastern Africa or Northern Kenya? In fact, it's terrorism and war is one of the key drivers of extinction of lions in various African countries. I think I can't exactly remember the figures, but it's certainly 10 plus countries where lions have gone extinct. One of the key drivers of that has been civil war over long periods of time. Generally what happens with civil war or terrorism, or not so much terrorism war, but more civil war, is that people live and hide away from perhaps another force, perhaps the government force. They might hide away in the bush somewhere and become a rebel force. And those rebel forces need to be fed. And so all wildlife suffers terribly during any form of civil war. And so areas where you have unrest and lawlessness, of course, are difficult to get into, and governments just don't spend any money in those areas on their protected area networks. So they end up as paper parks. You have a protected area in name only, but it's empty because it's been plundered for people to eat the wildlife. So definitely that is also a threat that lions face. I'm really very grateful to folks for sending in your questions, and please keep them coming in. I'm going to try and adjust the exposure here a little bit, just in case we can get it a bit better. I don't seem to be achieving that, but I'm sure it's not too bad out there. Andrew asks, does lion poaching fund terrorism like elephant poaching does? So I don't think so at this stage, but we are concerned. So clearly elephant poaching and rhino poaching in Africa is linked to organized crime syndicates and organized crime. And it's because the value of that resource is just so high. So it's people that are criminally inclined and set up criminal networks can use these products, these parts of animals to generate income, potentially for other illegal activities. What we are seeing now that we are quite concerned about, though, is that over the last 4 to 5 years, we're starting to see in consignments of rhino horns, for example, we see parcels of lion teeth and claws. And so we know that there's a massive increase in trade of these parts of lions for trinket trade in the Far East. Folks order lion teeth and claws on websites, and so the traders have to have them. And what you tend to find is that the wildlife dealers, the traders, the illegal traders, it's always the same folks that are dealing in rhino horns or ivory, are also dealing in other animal products, for example, like lion teeth and claws. And then not just as worrying is the lion bone trade coming out of South Africa. So what we're seeing there is that through the legal harvest of captive bred lions, staggering numbers, 800, 900 lions a year being killed in captivity for the pleasure of a very unusual kind of sportsman in my mind. The South African government has allowed the export of lion bones since 2007 to the Far East as a substitute. The traders that are buying this are either using it as a substitute for tiger bones when they produce tiger bone wine, although there's now a new product on the market in the Far East called lion bone wine. It's a status symbol that people use. And so what we're seeing in countries around, so this export is legal from South Africa. You know, I don't personally agree with that industry. I think that the South African government should close down all forms of captive breeding and hunting, etc., of lions. But what we're seeing is that in countries around South Africa, folks are now starting to poach lions for these body parts, particularly at the moment for teeth and claws. So nowadays when lions are poached in Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Zambia and Namibia, what we tend to find is that the head of the lion is cut off and that the paws are cut off. So the poachers don't necessarily as yet take the whole carcass and convert the carcass into bones, etc. But they quickly chop off the paws and heads and run off and extract those and sell those. But there is strong indications also from parts of Mozambique now that traders are willing to pay up to $1,500 for a full lion carcass, particularly because they want the bones and also the teeth and claws. So this is a new market that's developed. It's very worrying, and I really do believe that it's coming on the back of a legal market from South Africa. And I really do think that we've got to curb this now before it becomes too severe for lions by stopping the legal trade from South Africa and then doing everything we can through our anti-poaching efforts to curb the illegal trade in body parts. Because once that market in the Far East really gets big and people start to realize that this is an interesting product that people want, I think lions will face the same sort of poaching pressures that tigers have faced. You know, for those of you that don't know, tigers declined in recent times to around about 3,000 individuals. They've now started to increase through efforts from organizations like Panthera and others in the Tigers Forever program. We're now about 3,900 wild tigers. But I don't ever want to face a world where lions decline to those sorts of numbers because a market for their body parts was developed in Asia such that there would be those sorts of pressures on lion populations. John asks, what's particularly unique about lions in respect to other big cats? Wonderful. Taking me back to my roots, sort of a behavioral ecology question. Well, I could talk all day and all night and all tomorrow about lion ecology and etc. And the whole thing that sort of differentiates lions from the other cats is their strongly social nature, the fact that they form these groups of related individuals that we call prides. So a pride is generally comprised of 4 to 6, let's say, typically on average, adult females, 2 to 3 adult males, and their cubs and sub-adults. And they are highly social, and in their sociality they just do so many unusual things. There's no dominance hierarchy. So all females in the group of equal rank, all males in a group of equal rank. And this is very unusual in a sort of a social species. There's normally some sort of dominance, some sort of pecking order. But it's just this unique fact that lions are social, that they defend their territories, they defend their cubs as a social unit. That's why they're social. There are many, many debates and reasons what have been purported as to why lions are social, but the real root of it is that lions need to be social to defend their territories, to the space in which they raise their cubs, and the food resources that are in their particular territory. And so lions will fight incredibly viciously for this. One thinks of territories and territory fighting often more sort of from the context of male lions, these big manes that these males run around and fight with each other. But female on female fighting is very intense, and the wounding rates are quite high, especially if males help females in a fight. And so I think this whole social nature and the social fabric and the fascinating relationships that lions form, that for me make them very unique amongst the cats. There's no other cat species that is anywhere near as social as lions. Angie asks, what is the biggest thing you can say, that we can say, to teach others that speak negatively about lions? Thank you for everything you do. Lions are a passion of mine. So obviously you're asking, so we that love lions, what can we do to convince people that don't necessarily love lions that they perhaps could or should? So I think what you're getting to is that some communities tend to kill lions because they see them as a challenge to live with. And this talks to sort of socioeconomic challenges of living in wild spaces, in areas where wildlife also occurs, with lions being the sort of top order predator in those systems. And it's very hard to imagine that a rural community, any person living in a rural community, would value wildlife and want to protect wildlife for its intrinsic value if these animals are a large cost to them. And so humans are all about assessing cost and benefits. We think about these things all of the times in all the decisions we make. And so essentially, where I think the solution lies is that we need to show quite categorically and quite clearly to rural communities that finding ways to tolerate and to live with wildlife is economically beneficial to them. And this can only happen if you have an enabling environment of the government of the day in that country. So if the government or if the entrepreneurs in the area only benefit from the wildlife, so if all the money is streaming largely to government from taxation or tourism dollars or etc., and the money is not actually reaching rural communities, it's very hard to imagine that they would have any reason to want to tolerate and live with lions. And so this is a thing that needs to change dramatically in the African landscape in many countries. Many countries have shown some remarkable successes. I think Namibia is the pinnacle of this, where in the conservancy system in Namibia, all form of income generated from wildlife goes directly back to communities. The government does not take any of the money. And so you have this a situation of wealth transfer from the wildlife resource to people. And what we've seen with this model in Namibia is that wildlife has increased dramatically over the last 2 to 3 decades, to the point now where we're almost, it's often a double-edged sword in conservation. It's either too many or too few. But in some places now in Namibia, they have got a lot of wildlife, and they need to think about how to live alongside the sort of increased wildlife populations. So certainly I believe that if lions are going to exist and wildlife is going to exist in places where people live, there has to be benefits streaming to the people. Jobs is vital, absolutely critical. So developing the enterprises that engage people in work. And photographic tourism is obviously the most important one for that. You have very high numbers of people employed relative to the number of tourists, etc. So jobs, wealth creation, wealth dissemination into communities, these are the ways that we, I think, will create space, create an opportunity for wildlife to live alongside people. Amanda asks, what has been your favorite encounter with a lion, and also your least favorite? I don't know. It's always difficult to answer these sorts of questions because I've had so many. So what is my favorite encounter? There's just so many. Sure. I don't know. I'm just thinking. Let me think of my least favorite. Well, I've been scared a bit by lions. I certainly have had many interactions with lions which have been quite scary. I spent a lot of my time in academia when I was at the university, and also prior to that as a student, learning how to catch lions and to put radio collars on lions for various studies. And so I've done a huge amount of that work all over Africa, and so I've had some pretty sort of hairy moments with lions where they really scared me. I think the most scary one was once when I was doing my Ph.D. I got stuck in the mud in the night, and it was dark and rainy, and I was in a bit of a riverbed, and the Land Rover sunk into a mud hole, and there I was stuck. And the female lion that I was following in my headlights just before I got stuck, she had cubs, and she had them in a den just a couple hundred meters behind me. And she was walking, she had left the cubs behind, and she was walking away. And obviously when I got stuck, I lost sight of her. I switched the car off, and then I climbed out and went to look for some logs to put into the mud to use a high lift jack to get the vehicle up and then eventually get out of the hole. And but it was an open area where I was, and I saw there was a large tree a bit further away with a bush at the base of it. And I walked up there thinking there must be some stumps there. And as I got to the bush erupted with teeth and claws, and inside that bush was another lioness with her cubs. And it was just my bad luck that I walked up to the bush with her cubs. And I had a big red torch. I remember this torch very well. And I lifted it up and I shone it into there, and I shouted at the lion, and trying to, with bravado, prevent it from attacking me. And as I shook the torch, it went off. The battery somehow disconnected, and there I was standing in the pitch dark, drizzling rain. I couldn't see any stars. I couldn't even see the Land Rover when I turned around to try and get away from there. And this lioness was growling and snarling and just going absolutely crazy. And eventually my eyes sort of adapted to the dark, and I saw the outline of the Land Rover. And I managed to retreat back to it and climb into it. And no. But beautiful moments. I think just every time I see a lion, I do not ever lose my fascination and passion and interest for them. I love photographing them, and I love spending time with them. And so too many fantastic moments to mention, and a couple of scary ones along the way. Talk about the recent collaring of Santika. So we will be talking a bit on World Lion Day on Thursday. We will be releasing some new stories, and we're going to tell some stories from the Zambezi region in Namibia, where we are doing a study to look at what happens to young lions when they disperse from the prides in which they were born, which are generally inside small protected areas in that particular part of that landscape. So we have a couple of small protected areas relatively. Some of them have got one pride of lion in them, some have got 2 or 3, some could have more in the future, but they might only have a few prides now. And the question we've got is, so we found mechanisms, we found ways to protect these lions. We know that the anti-poaching work is effective. We're working very hard outside the protected areas to ensure that human-wildlife conflict is mitigated. But so what in terms of dispersal and genetic connectivity between populations? are the lions that are born in these prides and that leave them, are they able to move through these human landscapes and connect with lions in other places? And so Cintiqa is a particularly interesting young lion. I think he's got one of the more challenging paths ahead of him relative to some of the other ones in our study, because he is in a pride of lions where he's the only sub-adult male. And so he will leave there probably as a singleton, all on his own. And so we've collared him recently. He's about 3.5 years old now. He's very beautiful. We'll publish on our blog post on Thursday some photos of him. And so who knows what Cintiqa's life is likely to be. I mean, the realist in me says Cintiqa's probably not going to last very long once he moves out there. But this is the thing. This is the great challenge. We need to know. So we need to quantify with data what happens to the dispersal of lions, what happens to lions when they disperse. Do they make it? Do they connect? Are our efforts to make sure that these areas of connectivity, of relative coexistence are possible and are potentially working? Jeanette asks, is reintroduction a tool frequently used by Panthera for lions in Africa? So reintroduction is a challenging sort of thing. It's definitely a tool that we have in the toolbox. It's something we would only consider. Reintroduction implies that obviously there's local extinction of the lions. So you've got to actually bring them back. It's definitely a possibility. There's some small parks in Africa already where it's been done, but it's only feasible if the resources and the prey base, or the resources to protect an area and the prey base are there. So you've got to get that right first. So you've got to identify an area. You've got to invest in the prey. So that means eliminating poaching, etc. Let the prey populations recover, even potentially augment them. So we have a lot of tools in the toolbox. This has been done many times in South Africa, for example, Namibia, Zimbabwe. South Africa, there are 50 small populations of lions now on private and smaller game reserves. There are private lion populations on large conservancies in Zimbabwe. There are several of them now in Namibia. But what we're starting to see is that in some of the African countries to the north, Rwanda, Akagera National Park, Malawi, for example, getting requests now from governments to bring lions back. Sometimes it happens all by itself. We have this very interesting case in Gabon where we know that only a decade ago lions went extinct, and about a year and a half ago now, a male lion arrived in a park there. We think he came from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and so he's there, but there's no females there. So this also happens. Quite often we get reports from managers of these parks that they're very excited. They say, "Oh, we've got a lion." And of course, it's always a male lion. It's never a female. It's a dispersing male who's found this area. And we've got to think about what to do. The government of Gabon, for example, the president is absolutely determined that we will put lions back there. And so we will. We will catch lions from Botswana probably, and we will take them up and we will introduce them into this park in Gabon and hopefully start a population going there. So we have these tools and techniques, but we should only use them in the right context. We have to make sure that the prey is well protected, there's sufficient prey, and that the resources to manage the parks are in place. So it looks like I'm encouraged to wind up. To thank you very much for your questions and your encouragement, for congratulating us on our work and the things that we're trying to do. And we certainly are determined to make a difference. When I was thinking about 2 or 3 years ago strategically about where to take Panthera's lion program, what did I want to achieve? What did I want to sort of put in place before I retired? And I said to my colleagues, I want to shift the bar from the current situation where there's sort of 20,000 lions in the wild to 30,000 lions. So what I want to see is I want to see a trajectory of improvement. I'm not prepared to accept the status quo. I'm not prepared to accept the fact that lions will just keep continuing to decline and that we will not find ways to coexist or to protect and manage them properly. We know exactly how to do it. We have tremendous knowledge. We have incredibly capable people. What we lack is financial resources, government commitments, government investment, multilateral agency investment, etc. We need to make the argument that these wild spaces matter. And they don't only matter for the wildlife that lives there, they matter for us because they are key to our existence. The fresh water, the good quality air, etc., that comes from protected areas is absolutely critical for our life. So there's a couple of things that we would like you to follow at Panthera. We would like you to potentially sign up for our email group. We would like you to look at the hashtag #LetLionsLive. We'd like you to look at our website, www.panthera.org. We would like you to follow us on social media at Panthera Cats. And we want your support. We want you to make a difference for lions yourself. We want you to think about what you can do, spreading the word. Every dollar counts. There's so much that we can do, motivating our governments, encouraging bilateral support. Many of the European countries, Germany, Holland, etc., tremendous investment in African countries through bilateral support from their governments. So we have to make a difference. We have to fix things. We cannot accept the fact that lions are on a trajectory towards decline. I don't think on a trajectory towards demise. We have to turn that around, and I think we can. And I think I want you to sign up for more information at Let Lions Live. The website is letlionslive.org. And thank you very much for your support and your engagement in this live webcam feed today. Again, thanks to my friends who've helped me facilitate it, Ilala Lodge, and here I am in Zimbabwe, a very challenging country in Africa, but where people are trying very hard to make a difference and to protect their wildlife and to showcase it to the world. So come and look at lions in Africa. Come to our lodges, come to our national parks, and ask questions, and make sure that the tourism operators that you're working with are doing things sustainably and responsibly. And come with a purpose. Come and make your safari more than just flippantly looking at lions. And thank you very much for your time and your listening to my conversation today. It's the longest conversation I've had with myself, but I've really enjoyed it, and talking to you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.